Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, resident _of Collinwood for BitShoot. I'm here to do a read along / review of John Philip Betancourt's continuing blog series, The Return of Dark Shadows. So I hope you guys enjoy this. I'm trying something different with this a little bit. So, Series 1, Chapter 9, which is a two-parter. I'll do both parts tonight. I'll do the second one in another video, depending on how long it takes me to read this one. So here I go. Series 9, Part 1, A Full Moon. Dusk was quickly turning to night, and Collinsport would soon see the birth of a full moon that would fill the sky like a giant gray disk floating alone with only gray and black clouds to keep it company. This meant a great deal to Victor and his son Christopher. Early that morning, Victor had warned his son about Alexander Collins' family connections, which didn't sit well with Chris, and they hadn't spoken for the rest of the day. The full moon meant they had to take precautions, and soon. Victor grabbed a leather satchel from his room that he used on nights like this. In it he carried a gun, flashlight, and vials of a sedation potion. Victor then scurried around the house looking for his son, but he couldn't find him. Then he looked at the basement door, a door that every full moon he and Christopher went into, a door that kept the people of Collinsport safe from something they wouldn't understand, something they would fear, something deadly. Victor quickly opened the door to the basement and crept down the dark stairwell, trying his best not to make a single sound. It was quiet in the basement. There was no light. He took a deep breath and lifted the flashlight over his right hand. That pointing a gun, the light scanned the room, but Victor was alone. When he felt safe enough, he turned on the light of the basement. A giant steel cage emerged from the darkness. A cage that was open and empty. A cage for Christopher on nights of a full moon. Victor began to panic. Christopher was missing, and time was running out before the full moon's light hit Collinsport. He whispered to himself, "God help us." Collinwood Manor was just as busy as Victor and Christopher's house. Leopold and Carolyn had just returned from the family cemetery, where they had finally rid themselves of the witch who had turned their lives upside down. Carolyn, for her part, felt strangely safe in Leopold's presence, protected and secure. "What will happen to her?" Carolyn asked of Claudia, pouring herself tea. "She'll die. Her powers are gone, and she can't live forever on hallowed ground. It's over," Leopold said, reaching for Carolyn for a hug. "You're safe now," he added. We're safe now," he added. They embraced, and Carolyn almost felt like she was hugging Jack one last time. "What will happen to you?" she asked. And before Leopold could answer, Caleb burst into, interrupting the private moment, excited and happy. "Carolyn," he said loudly. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I have an amazing surprise." Carolyn and Leopold stepped away from each other in that awkward moment, waiting for Caleb to reveal his surprise. As Caleb stepped away from the door, the tall blonde woman who came to see him at the Blue Whale while he was on his date with Kat stepped in. Carolyn gasped in shock. "Kimberly," she said. Oh, Carolyn, it's been too long, the blonde said, reaching out for Carolyn. Leopold, this is Caleb's mother, Dr. Kimberly Collins, my cousin David's ex-wife. What are you doing here, Kim? asked Carolyn asked. I heard about Jack, and I'm so very sorry. I wish I could have been here for for his funeral. It's a pleasure to meet you, mister, Kimberly said, introducing herself with a formal handshake. Leopold's eyes were fixed on the beautiful doctor. He was instantly fascinated and attracted. Divernet, Divernet, Leopold, Divernet, and the pleasure is mine, Leopold said, kissing Kimberly's hand. Leopold could feel Kimberly's pulse. The blood raced through her body. It was as if her heart was beating in his ears. It was an incredible sensation that he hadn't felt before. It was invigorating and alluring, something Leopold wanted more of. Carolyn could see there was a spark in Leopold's eyes. Kimberly was after all incredibly beautiful, and even though she knew that Leopold was no longer Jack, it still stung. It was like seeing her husband at a younger age flirt and kiss another woman's hand like he did when they first met. It was a stab to Carolyn's heart. I hope you don't mind. I've asked her to stay here, Caleb said to Carolyn, who seemed surprised at his invitation. Oh, of course, she's family, Carolyn said, a tight jaw. I'll set up one of the bedrooms upstairs. Excuse me. Carolyn continued, happy to make her exit. Caleb followed. Carolyn introduced you as a doctor. What kind of medicine do you practice? Leopold asked as he made Kimberly a drink from the bar. I dabble in DNA genetics. Genetics. I work with genetic medications to create new medications. But after my divorce from Caleb's father, David, I took some time off and it was a bit hard on me, Kimberly said, accepting the gin and tonic from Leopold. And you're originally from Collinsport? Leopold inquired. No, I lived here after the marriage, but once David left, I did too. Which I realize now I shouldn't have. I feel awful about leaving Caleb here alone when he was so young, she answered. All that matters is you're back. I'm so happy to meet more of the family, Leopold said, sitting next to Kimberly on the sofa under the giant portrait of Barnabas Collins over the fireplace. And how do you know Carolyn? She said, sipping her cocktail. Leopold paused for a second to think. He couldn't come right out and say who he really was. The bizarre story would certainly confuse the good doctor. I'm related to Jack. He was my mother's nephew. And I come like you to be by Carolyn and Alexander Sidus. They won't. The story seemed to work perfectly. Kimberly smiled kindly and continued to drink from her cocktail. Well, I'm sure they're all happy we're here. All here to be with them at this time, she said. Leopold's eyes seemed to be smiling along with his whole face. It was love at first sight. Upstairs, Carolyn and Caleb set up Kimberly's room. Carolyn made the bed furiously. What's the matter? Caleb said nothing. Her icy body language. Noting. Carolyn threw the large Empire pillows on the bed and turned to Caleb. Caleb, this is not the time for visitors. How could you have invited her, especially after everything that she did to your father? She's my mother, Carolyn, Caleb said sternly. I wouldn't turn her away no matter what she did. I've put that in the past. I think you should too. Carolyn lifted an eyebrow cryptically. We'll see about that. Early that evening, Alexandra had received a text message from Christopher to meet her at the coffee shop in downtown Collinsport. He said he needed to talk to her. She had a feeling it had to be to do with her father's death. The Jack/Leopold situation had progressed so quickly she hadn't had time to explain. Her nerves were on edge. It was now just a half hour before the full moon was visible, and Christopher unknowingly was putting not only his and Alex's life in jeopardy, but the whole town of Collinsport. Christopher pulled into the parking lot and could see Alex waiting inside the coffee shop. As he got out of his car, his father's Jeep quickly and recklessly turned into the parking lot, too, throwing an icy sledge from the ground all over Chris. What the hell are you doing? Chris said to his father as he dusted the ice off. You have to come home, Victor said. No, Christopher said defiantly. Get into the Jeep, Chris, right now. Do you hear me? There is no time, Victor said, grabbing his son's forearm. No time? What are you talking about? Christopher asked, confused. Victor grabbed Chris, and they began to struggle in the parking lot, pushing and shoving each other between the cars. Victor could not get a good grip over his powerful son, who was stronger than he even knew. Victor feared Chris would soon overpower him. Dad, what are you doing? Chris said, looking over at Alex in the shop, hoping she wouldn't see them arguing. As Chris turned to look, Victor removed one of his syringes filled with the sedative and plunged it into Chris's neck, causing him to instantly faint in his father's arms. Victor quickly dragged his sleeping son to the back of his Jeep and placed him in the back, tying his legs and hands together, then closing the back. He jumped into the front seat and started to drive off. Just as the night clouds parted and the moon was revealed, a beam of lunar light seeped into Victor's Jeep as they drove back home. And then, just as Victor's worries began, his son's transformed quickly and fiercely into a sharp-toothed, angry werewolf, a beast. So, I think we're going to get time to do the other one here. Oh, I went the wrong way. That's not good. We'll do them. I think we'll just do it together. Here we go. Okay, Series 1, Chapter 10, A Full Moon, Part 2. So I'm going to read Part 2 for you guys. I have enough time to do this. The moon stood in its silent position, a white-faced orb spilling its milking glow all over the foggy fishing town of Collinsport, Maine. The winds kept the sea at an icy chop, rocking the docked boats in the marina back and forth. Excuse me. In a coffee shop in the quaint downtown area of Collinsport, Alexandra Thorne waited at least an hour for date Christopher Reed to arrive. She text messaged him profusely, but he never responded. Eventually, she packed up her things and headed home. As she stepped out into the cold Collinsport air, she failed to notice Chris's car just a few parking stalls away from hers in the cafe. Parking lot sitting there abandoned by its owner. She got in her car and drove back home. As Alex drove home to Collinwood, Claudia lay in the Collins family crypt at Eagle Hill Cemetery. There was no simple way of her to get her eyes back inside the mansion and continue on her quest to destroy every last of her father's descendant. The man who took her from her mother, Angelique's arms, and placed it in the hands of a stranger in an orphanage back in time. Her obsession for getting even with her the father she always felt abandoned her was now at a fever pitch. By the way, that's Barnabas is her father, if you guys didn't watch the earlier videos. Claudia withered and screamed inside the crypt in a frustrated and sweaty rage. She had to get out, but being locked away in a cold, dark crypt on hallowed sacred ground had stifled her powers except one. The only power she had left was the power of metaphysical transportation, which didn't use black magic. It only used the power of her mind. Claudia still retained the use of her mental strengths. Every last ounce she could muster to transport her life force into someone innocent and someone pure to continue her mission. And just as Claudia plotted this, Alexander drove past the cemetery. Alex's eyes fixated on the passing cemetery and the fall-covered tombstones. A shiver went up her spine as her eyes turned back to the darkened street in front of her. The full moon was now high above Collinsport, and Victor made his way as fast as he could with his werewolf son sedated and tied up and covered in a black cloak in the back of his Jeep so that no one would see the monster he had become. As Victor drove, a beam of moonlight reflected off the syringe Victor tossed on the passenger seat after he and Chris scuffled. It had been filled with the sedative Victor gave Christopher so that he could safely transport him home, but the syringe was only half empty. During a fight with Christopher in the coffee shop parking lot, Victor had plunged the syringe into his son's neck, but in his rush neglected to use the entire amount of the sedative. Victor panicked and sped up the Jeep to get home faster. The winding and curling roads that led to Victor and Christopher's home felt longer and longer. The closer they got, the further Victor felt, and he could hear the werewolf begin to awaken. Victor sped up. As he did, a vicious groan came from the back of the Jeep. The werewolf snarled and tried to move, but was still tied and growled louder. Victor tried to reach for the syringe on the seat next to him so that he could use the rest of the sedative. Victor leaned over and reached. As he did, he pulled the steering wheel too far over onto oncoming traffic on the other side of the road. The other cars started honking and moving out of the way, and Victor tried to overcorrect his Jeep, and it spun out into the thick woods, blasting through trees and bushes deep into a forest and finally slamming up against a large, thick trunk. It was an explosion. Christopher the werewolf favor. Sorry guys. Bruised and bloodied, Victor pushed open his crushed door and made his way to the back of his Jeep. Limping and holding the right side of his rib cage, he could hear people trampling through the forest from the road, witnesses of the accident calling out to see if he was okay. He had to think quick. No one could see Christopher in this shape. He popped open the back of his Jeep, and there was Christopher, a hairy beast growling and foaming at the mouth, still tied up and looking Victor dead in the eyes. Victor took a pocket knife and freed Chris's legs and arms. Chris howled and swung his sharp claws at Victor, nearly slashing his jugular vein. A terrified Christopher fell backwards into a snow heap, and Christopher dashed off into the forest. Just as people from the road arrived to help, "Jesus, man, are you okay?" a witness said, helping Victor up. Victor only nodded, but never looked at them. He only looked out into the foggy forest in the direction Christopher ran in, praying he'd be safe until daylight. Back at Collinwood, Leopold and Kimberly were having a conversation, but it was getting late, and Leopold began to feel a need for his nightly vampiric feed. Being in Kimberly's presence was not a good mixture for Kimberly. He politely excused himself and set off to the old house where he had been staying, leaving Kimberly in the drawing room alone, awaiting Carolyn and Caleb's return. Kimberly peeked around the corner of the foyer and up the stairs, making sure it was safe enough to grab her phone to make a phone call. It was essential no one would hear her. Carolyn and Caleb were still upstairs, so she went into her purse and pulled out her cell phone and dialed. She waited and waited, but the phone only rang. "Come on, Victor, answer your phone," she said as his voicemail picked up. "It's Kim. I'm back in town at Collinwood. I need to see you, Caleb, before we, give me a call later tonight. I'll have my own room, okay? Bye." Just as Kimberly hung up her call to Victor, Alexander pulled into the long, winding driveway of Collinwood Mansion. Her body immediately registered with Claudia's powerful pull from her locked state in Catherine Collins' tomb at the cemetery. In the darkened tomb, Claudia closed her eyes. Her dark soul lifted from her body like a black mist, surrounding the entire coffin. It seeped out through the tight cracks and into the air surrounding cemetery, floating through the air all the way Collinwood, faster than the wind, blew through the trees. The spirit was looking for Alex's body to inhabit. Alex, still sitting in her car, rolled her eyes at the floorboard of her car. Her purse had spilled. Flustered, she slowly put her things back into her purse and tightened the scarf around her neck to step out into the cold. She opened the door, and almost as soon as she stood on her own 2 feet, Claudia's black mist of a soul descended on Alex like a sinister fog engulfing her. Alex gasped for air and tried to bat the strange black fog away, but as she did, portions of the fog morphed into the heads of a vicious black dogs with red eyes biting at her hands. The mist soon overcame Alex and entered her body, tossing her to the ground. She writhed on the floor, tossing and turning in the cold snow, fighting Claudia's soul, but it was too late. As soon as Alex got back to her feet, her beautiful blue eyes has flashed black. Claudia had possessed her body. Now inside of Alex's body, Claudia made her way into Collinwood. No one was around. She heard voices upstairs and recognized one as Carolyn. As Alex/Claudia quietly made her way into the main drawing room and closed the flue of the lit fireplace, Claudia lit a candle from the drawing room and made her way into the library. She looked around at the centuries of books the family had collected over the years. Vast amounts of stories from the world's greatest storytellers. She picked up one book and opened it to the center. The flickering light from the candle shined on her face like a setting sun. She smiled and put the flame to the page and set books ablaze. Book after book, over and over until the flame spread to the drapes and passed shelf to shelf. And enveloping the entire room. The smoke was thick and gathering and not filtering through the old house, especially now that the flue of the fireplace was closed. One room ablaze, then another, then another. As the whole bottom floor of Collinwood started to glow orange and red, Claudia made her way outside to watch it burn, her eyes flashing black again and again, reflecting the inferno that was now Collinwood. At the police station, a frustrated Kate walking in, throwing her purse on her chair, causing a loud noise and lots of attention. Her partner Loomis sat across from her at the desk, eating a sausage sandwich with a big grin on his face. This was a moment he had been waiting for all night. Let me guess, didn't get as much Collins access as you would have liked, huh? Huh? Loomis said, wiping his mouth. You won't even believe what happened. We're sitting there and drinking and talking, and this hot, gorgeous blonde shows up, Kate finally said, taking a seat at her desk. Another chick? Loomis questioned. His mother is some gorgeous doctor lady who he hasn't seen in like 10 or 15 years, and she just so happens to show up right when we're trying to reconnect. Needless to say, he cut the night short and bolted with her back home to see the rest of the family, Kate explained. Where's she been all this time? Loomis asked, sipping coffee from a paper cup. I don't know. He didn't really say, and all I know is that something went down with his mother and father back in the day, and she skipped town, and his father ended up raising him alone here in Collinsport. At least, that's the cliff notes of the story I got, Kate explained, as the two detectives talked about Kate's failure to get closer to Caleb and his family's commotion. and his family, a commotion came from the other end of the room. Loomis flagged down a passing police officer heading to a call. What's up? Loomis asked. Massive fire just over by Widow's Hill, he said, dashing off. Widow's Hill? That's on Collinwood, Kate said as she and Loomis grabbed their coats and followed the other police officers to the scene. As Kate and Loomis arrived at Collinwood, the blaze had risen to the second of its 3 floors. The smoke flew high into the dark sky, flowing up as if it were 2 giant heads reaching for the full moon that orbited above. Kate ran over to the front and saw Alexander still standing in the driveway, still possessed by Claudia's evil spirit. "Alex, what are you doing? Get back!" Kate said as Claudia quickly changed Alex's blackened eyes back to blue. Loomis, Alexander, and Kate hurried back to safety as the fire raged on. Carolyn, Caleb, and Kimberly nowhere to be found. That was part 1 and 2 of John Philip Betancourt's continuing blog series, The Return of Dark Shadows. I know I muffled some words, and I apologize for that. I really enjoyed, Christopher's werewolf turn. It was sort of hinted in the previous chapters that Christopher was a werewolf when Leopold went after him and Alexander, and sort of Leopold backed away from him almost. So I think John did a really good job hinting that earlier, but not giving it away. And here, it's boom. This is what's going on. Christopher is a werewolf, and him and Victor, have carried this secret for years and years and years. He does not want his son to hurt anybody, not just the Collins family, not just him, but the whole town. He wants to not just protect his son, but other people, and it's a tricky situation. But he's very prepared, but mistime and missteps, and Christopher being head over heels in love with Alexander does not help things, and it sets things in motion for Christopher to become the werewolf, which is really nice. I like that. I enjoyed the car ride, him being tied up in the wreck. He starts untying him because he doesn't know what else to do with him, and what else do you do in the woods? Or people are coming down. Bam! He gets scratched up. I could just see the blood just coming. It made me think of American Werewolf in London. Just, that's what it made me think about. My favorite part though, I love the werewolf thing. This is where you really feel for Christopher. I feel right here, because he's in love with Alexander. He wants to have a relationship with her. I think, when I interviewed John Philip Betancourt, I was saying, which do you prefer? And who, out of Leopold and Christopher. And I could see why the connection of Christopher is so much easier to make here. Not that Leopold wasn't. I think Leopold's a good transition. But Christopher is so much more of a interesting aspect. Here you have a young man who is a werewolf, and not that Leopold asked to become not that Jack Thorne asked to become Leopold, because he didn't, but it's sort of something I was saying in my earlier videos, that you're more getting Carolyn and Christopher straight from the beginning, where you feel Christopher and Alexander from the beginning, and Carolyn and Jack are sort of, they've been married 30 odd years, they have a lovely daughter. I'm not saying that's not a big deal, it is, but it's, I don't know how to explain this. It's cooler to get it from something from the beginning of two people's relationships, where, to me, in my opinion, at least from my reader's perspective, Jack and Carolyn felt like this is the end of their marriage, so to speak, in a weird way. I could be wrong, but that's just my narrative on it, my opinion on it, and I want to stress that when I speak after this, I'm giving my opinion, and I'm not saying that's fact. One of my favorite parts, obviously, is here's where you get Alexander and Claudia, and how Alexander got her powers, really, through Claudia, by Claudia possessing her. I really thought that was a really good job here by John doing that. This sets up a lot of events, obviously. The fire, Alexander being possessed and setting the house ablaze, because Claudia's doing it through her. Claudia has possessed her. And I love when I was reading the Kate thing, I forgot how much fire Kate Banning had, and boy, that woman, she's a ball of fire. She's fun to read. So John did a really good job here with Kate, with the Kate and Detective Loomis. I told you guys their interaction was fun for me to read like before, and I didn't do a read along before, but now you sort of see why I did, because Kate and Detective Loomis McGovern, their chemistry is like really good. I enjoy it. This to me is a very enjoyable blog. I finally finished going back through series 1. Obviously, yes, I'm going to go through each and every series. I decided to do a read along to close out the first series. So let me guys know what you think about the read along for number 1, because I was nervous doing this, even though I've done it. I've done read alongs for my own stories, but never someone else's. I get nervous doing these. But one of my favorite parts about part 2, it's my insulin pump beeping. I gotta change it. But my favorite part about part 2, outside of Claudia and Alexander, was definitely Leopold just leaving at the right time. Leopold seemingly leaving the feed. I think that was just so nicely done. And the other part was definitely Kate and Detective McGovern. Don't get me wrong, I love the again, the possession here is key of Alexandra. Claudia possessing Alexander's key, but I really love Kate Banning and Detective McGovern's just interaction with each other. Here's this woman, she's pissed, and she's pissed for 2 reasons. That motherfucker blew me off. What the hell? Not that she said that, but come on. Wouldn't you be pissed if someone stood you up? Well, yeah, I'm pissed. And, I had to do my job too at the same time. Jesus. But, yeah, that was a lot of fun. So, I definitely enjoyed both chapters for sure. The storytelling is really unique and fun. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, this read-along review. And I hope I didn't muffle too many words. I apologize if I did. Links, I'm just going to leave one link, because you can read both chapters. You can just go to the bottom, hit the arrow, and read both chapters. So link will be in the description box on YouTube, on BitChute. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.